Good evening, esteemed guests, faculty members, and participants. I am Swagata,
And I am Srijita.
and it's a privilege to welcome you all to the commencement of Geogenesis 2026. Before we begin our formal proceedings, I would like to draw your attention to our distinguished sponsors displayed on the screen. An initiative of this scale requires significant collaboration. Georox Consulting and Bharat Engineering Stores Corporation for their unwavering commitment to the advancement of earth sciences.
It is inspiring to see such a robust gathering within our digital venue today. We are joined by 121 participants representing 37 academic institutions from across the region. What began as a local initiative has evolved into a significant regional hub for aspiring geologists. Whether you are joining us from your university campus or your private study, we welcome you to this professional community.
The Geoscience Society, established in 2023, was founded with a clear mission to bridge the gap between theoretical academic study and the practical application of earth sciences. Though we are a young organization, our focus remains steadfast on fostering a collaborative environment where students and professionals can exchange insights and advance the field together, transcending the limitations of a virtual medium. Geogenesis serves as the flagship manifestation of this mission. Our objective is to provide a platform that is as intellectually rigorous as it is engaging. This GeoFest is designed to challenge your technical acumen, facilitate critical breakthrough moments, and showcase the vast diversity within the geosciences. Today is about more than a competition. It is about strengthening the professional network that connects our various campuses.
Our itinerary for 2 days feature 7 specialized events designed to test a comprehensive range of geological skills. Our sessions will include GeoJournal, GeoPalette, TerraVision, LithoSpeak, Flip the Fault, GeoInsights, and GeoDisplay. To ensure the highest standards of evaluation, we are honored to be joined by a distinguished panel of 8 adjudicators. We extend our deepest gratitude to Professor Gautam Deb, Presidency University, Professor Dipanjan Majumdar, Ashutosh College, Professor Orpita Samanto, Ashutosh College, Professor Ayuti Banerjee, Durgapur Government College, Professor Phulmoti Ram, Ashutosh College, Professor Jeet Majumdar, Jogomaya Devi College, Mr. Sharbojit Datto, Presidency University, and Mr. Sudipto Sarkar, ISI. Thank you all for contributing your expertise and time to evaluate our participants. I must also recognize the efforts of the organizing committee. Orchestrating a virtual symposium of this magnitude involves complex logistical and technical coordination. The team has worked tirelessly over the past several months to ensure a seamless experience for every participant. Their dedication is the foundation upon which today's event is built. We once again express our formal gratitude to our sponsors. Their support is instrumental in providing the resources necessary to transition from academic life into professional practice. A heartfelt thanks to Georox Consulting, which specializes in providing mineral exploration and mining advisory services, including geological mapping, geophysical service, and techno economic due diligence, and Bharat Engineering Stores Corporation, which is a professional supplier of geological and hydrological equipment, specimens, and tools, while also providing specialized surveying and reporting services for making Geogenesis 2026 possible. Here is a glimpse of their work.
With this, we would like to close our inaugural session. We have an intense, rewarding day ahead of us. Please remain attentive to the screen for instructions regarding the transition to our talk show and all the subsequent events. We trust that Geogenesis 2026 will be a milestone in your professional development. Thank you for your presence and your participation. Let the GeoFest begin. The event will be further coordinated by Srijita. Over to you, Srijita.
A warm and wonderful good evening to our esteemed guests, faculty, and fellow students. I am Shrita Mojumdar, a second year undergraduate student from the Department of Geology at Presidency University, Kolkata, and a member of the Geoscience Society. It is with profound pleasure and immense excitement that I welcome each and every one of you to this landmark occasion. Our speaker for the day is Ms. Ritanuka Ghosh, Geomechanics Engineer at SLB. Ritanuka ma'am completed her BSc course from Presidency University, Kolkata and MSc from IIT KGP. She is here to impart her invaluable insights and compelling experiences. A session we have all anticipated with great eagerness and enthusiasm. The Geoscience Society was conceptualized back in 2023. Beginning simply as a small WhatsApp group, our initial vision was to forge a common platform that would unite geology students from diverse colleges across West Bengal. Our community, though perhaps young in years, is fiercely united by a singular profound passion: the earth, its dynamic processes, and the intricate science that governs it. We took a significant step forward earlier this year, strategically expanding our digital footprints onto LinkedIn and Facebook. This outreach has allowed us to connect with a wider constellation of geology enthusiasts, transforming our network into a larger, more vibrant, and highly interactive forum. The moment we have all been waiting for is finally here. Without further ado or delay, it's my privilege to hand over the proceedings to today's capable host, Abhishek Tari, who will seamlessly continue the session and guide the conversation forward with Ms. Ritanuka Ghosh. Thank you.
Hello. Good evening, everyone. On the behalf of the Geoscience Society, I warmly welcome you all to the today's special session of our Geogenesis talk show. I am Abhishekta Maiti from IIT Bombay, and I am delighted to be your host for this session. So, Geogenesis is a online geological event which is inspired by the origin and evolution of the Earth, combining geo and genesis, which means the Earth, as well as genesis means the creation. It highlights the processes that forms our planet, from early crust formation to the modern plate tectonics, bringing together all the enthusiasts to explore Earth's dynamic history. Today, we are honored to have with us Ms. Ritanuka Ghosh, a geomechanical engineer at SLB. She completed her BSc in geology from Presidency University and MSc in geology from IIT Kharagpur. In this session, she will be sharing her insights on connecting academic geology to subsurface decision making, a newbie perspective, helping us understand how classroom knowledge translates into real world industry applications. Connecting academic geology to subsurface decision making, a newbie perspective focuses on the application of fundamental geological concepts to real world subsurface challenges. It provides an introductory understanding of how academic knowledge is translated into practical decision making within the geoscience industry. Before we proceed, I would like to mention that please feel free to drop all your questions in the chat box. We'll be taking them after the session. And so without any further delay, we welcome Ms. Ritanuka Ghosh.
Okay. Hello everyone. Just let me turn on my video. Yeah.
Am I visible and audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thanks for the lovely introduction. So I'll start with my presentation and everything, but I think before that, just one very small information that you can ask any question related to anything. I think there is some issue in putting on your mic, so maybe you can put your questions in the comment box, and I'll just check it, or whatever be the process, I'll just address to it. And no need to worry about anything. You can ask any question if you want related to uh, anything. It can be not unrelated to what I'm speaking today as well. So do not think about it. And I'll just start sharing my screen. So before that, just let me know if you can see my screen. You can see my screen?
Yeah, it's big.
Okay. Okay, so shall I start, or shall we wait until 6 p.m.? Anything? I'll start, right?
Yeah, ma'am.
All right. Okay, so let me put this in. You can see this in slideshow mode, right? Because sometimes there is some issue.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Okay, so my topic will be connecting academic geology to subsurface decision makings. So it's basically I have been to this industry for about 1.5 years. It's still not 1.5 years. I'm very new, and this is a huge industry. So I'm just at the boundary of going into the industry. So whatever I felt, like coming from a total academic background and doing, like, mostly focusing on my hard rocks and everything, whatever I felt whenever I entered into this industry, and over the past 1 year, what I've seen, what I've experienced, what I've gained, that thing I wanted to put it all in one of the in one presentation and share it with you all. So thank you, Geoscience Society, for giving me this opportunity to present this thing to all of you. And it's going to be a very an overview of whatever I have seen in the past 1.5 years, and whatever I felt is important to get into this industry, or whatever I felt that whatever our concepts are used. So I'll be focusing more on that. So my title would be Connecting Academic Geology to Subsurface Decision Making, a newbie's perspective, which is me. I'm a newbie to this industry. And let's move on to this agenda of today. So initially, I'll give you all a very small introduction of myself, who I am and what I do, what I've done in the past few years. And then I'll move on to the oil and gas world, how I have seen it, how I have perceived it, what it is around like now in the world, what are the different companies, what are the different sectors, what are the different positions that the GNG comes in. So those areas, and then we can move on to the classroom concepts that actually help us to extract the hydrocarbons. That is what we are looking for, right? So that actually helps us to extract the hydrocarbons from the subsurface. The concepts that help us to understand that yes, there is something here that we need to take out, or what are the probable areas where we can go and search for oil and gas and everything, for which the entire world is fighting right now. And finally, how to step into this world, like what are the subjects that you need to focus if you want to have a strong hold of this industry. If you want to have a smooth transition into this industry, what are the subjects, what are the things apart from subjects that you need to know and have a perspective of. So this is my complete agenda. And in between, I would prefer to have questions at the end of my session. That would be, I think, suitable for both you and us, you and me. So, and if you have any particular question that is related to any of the slides that you are not being able to listen to my voice or not being able to understand what it's written or what it is, what does it mean, then you can just put into the comment box so that I can just get an idea about whatever the issue you're facing, right? All right. So let me have my point. Yeah. So this is me. Hello everyone. I am Litanuka Ghosh. I was born and brought up in Kolkata, and I have done my schooling from Pathabhavan, which is a school in Kolkata only. And I have done my bachelor's in geology from Presidency University from 2019 to 2022. From there, I strengthened my base. I got whatever fundamental geology I can learn, and then I went for masters in geology from IIT Kharagpur, and I've completed my masters in 2024. So it was a 2-year course, 2022 to 2024, and currently I'm working as a geomechanics engineer in Schlumberger or SLB, which I think you have heard of. It's a oil and gas based service company, and just a minute. Yeah. And I was particularly interested in some of the topics like mantle petrology, igneous sedimentology, sequence stratigraphy, subjects like these, some amount of metamorphic and structural as well. So I was mostly interested in hard rocks and the hard rock petrology that we generally mean to. And now currently I am in oil and gas industry. So yeah, that's a huge transition. And for my hobbies, I like to read books. I'm into music and musical instruments, and I love trekking as well. So overall, it was the 5 year of my experience in college was very good. It was full of all sort of things that I can do. I have done everything along with studies. So yeah, that's an overall view of my introduction or who I am. And we can now move on to the main topic. Just to ask, are you hearing any noise? Because there is something going on outside. Can you hear any noise coming?
No, ma'am, it's fine.
Okay. So I'm currently, I stay in Mumbai. So today is Ambedkar Jayanti and they are having some fun activities outside. So there are some mics and speakers. So let me know if you can't hear my noise. I can't hear my voice again. All right. Okay. So entering into this industry. So first of all, oil and gas industry is a huge industry. It almost is linked to all the geopolitical scenarios of the entire world. Right? You can see right now, whatever mess is happening over the world, it's just because who can have the most amount of oil and gas and everything. It's be it the Middle East, be it the Venezuela thing, and everything. So this is a very important, very sensitive, very volatile, very cyclic industry. It just goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down. It's something like that. And entering into this industry, you have to have an overall idea, like what is this industry? What are the sectors that are mainly there? And what are our roles? Like as a GNG people, what are our roles in this industry? Like what we can do to help? Right, because it's not only engineers, not only other sectors, or not only geologists only. We all together make a total collaboration of whatever we are doing in this industry and to get the hydrocarbons out from subsurface. Right. So in this industry, there are mainly 3 sectors. One is the upstream, midstream, and downstream. So what does upstream mean? Upstream means the hydrocarbon is there in the subsurface. Some people, they study they do reconnaissance studies, they read research papers and everything, and they take some soft data and try to understand that where is the most suitable area for hydrocarbon generation, or which part of the basin or which part of the land can have the most amount of, or that can be the potential hydrocarbon storage area, right? They go, they study, they understand that yes, this area can be a good petroleum system, and they try to work on that area, and they develop the idea, or they develop the field, right? And what they do then, they go and start drilling, they take out the hydrocarbon, and up to that upstream industry ends. Okay, so it's all about that discovery, the research and everything, the exploration, and then development and the operations part, like taking out the hydrocarbon, and that is where the upstream industry ends. Then we have the midstream industry. So whatever we have extracted, now it is with us. We need to transport it to somewhere where they can be processed, and where the hydrocarbon related byproducts, or the petroleum, the gas, the diesel, everything, the petrol, everything can be extracted or can be developed, right? So that transportation part, that carrying of huge amount of crude oil, the carrying of huge amount of that gas through pipelines and everything, that is controlled, or that is handled by the midstream industry. And finally the downstream, like whatever we are getting, we are putting it, we are taking out the petrol, we are taking out the diesel, we are taking out the LPG and everything, and then we are distributing to the public, to the normal users, to to different companies, to normal people, to the people of the world, and that what downstream industry does. Fair? Now, whatever GNG people, the geology, geophysics, the geoscience guys, they have their most involvement in the upstream part. So I also work in an upstream industry that focus on the exploration and development of the hydrocarbon, like taking out of the hydrocarbon, and does not generally get involved in these two parts. So today also I'll be mostly focusing on that upstream sector. All right. So there are two types of companies in upstream sector. One is in exploration and production, that is the E&P companies, and the other is the service providers. So what does E&Ps do? So they study, they have the blocks, they have the right to extract the hydrocarbons from their fields, their petroleum systems, and they do that. So these companies, they own the area, they take out the hydrocarbon, and it is all their property, right? So they are the exploration and the production companies. And then you have the service providers. What does they do? They provide assistance, they provide service to these E&P companies. So what does these service provider do? They provide them tools, like, okay, you want to take out the hydrocarbon, I'll provide you this whole system. I'll give you the tools, I'll give you the drilling machines, I'll give you labor, I'll give you everything. So they are service provider, they provide services. For example, let's say any E&P company wants to have a whole on research going about the hydrocarbon or the potential hydrocarbon zones in the formation. So the service provider will go and say, do you want to have a research on that area? I'll provide you the logs, I'll provide you the seismic attributes, I'll provide you the seismic sections and everything. So they actually go to the field and take out those information and provide support to these E&P companies. So again, in this E&P and service provider divisions, we have several common posts or designations. What are these? They can be either exploration, development, or operations. So from the name only you can understand that exploration means whenever we are looking out for the hydrocarbons, like whether it is present here or present there, it is present in this basin, whether it can be present in that basin, whether there is a completely virgin field, no one have got anything from that, but you guys start working on it and you find that, okay, there is a potential of this field to be a petroleum system, or this field can be a good petroleum prospect. So you guys go and work on that and you develop the field. You publish or you try to uplift the field to a potential petroleum reservoir or something of that system. So this is what the exploration people do. Then comes the development. That once the field is completely confirmed that okay, this field is completely proved to have hydrocarbon, they try to develop the hydrocarbon. That how much they can take out from that. Like for example, we have the hydrocarbons there, but whether the porosity or the permeability, they actually permit the hydrocarbon to come out, right? Or they whether the pores are connected or not. So these kind of things, that how economically, how commercially we can take out the development, the hydrocarbon from the formation, right? And finally the operations, that okay, everything is fixed, everything done, we have got a green signal to go and drill. So the operation people will go and drill and take out the hydrocarbon. So this is the final operations. So in every field, we have geologists, petrophysicists, geomechanics, geophysicists, and every other people involved. Okay, so if some geologist is working on this exploration part, they are called exploration geologists. If they are working in development, they are called development geologists. If they are working in operations, they are called operation geologists. So similarly, it's mostly the same for all the positions. Now coming to the overall oil and gas industry, this is the overall view, how the industry is divided into different sectors. Now coming to the top 10 industry of, or the top 10 oil and gas companies, accordingly, like recent top 10 oil and gas companies in the world, they are Saudi Aramco, which is the largest, it's the oil giant, it's based in Abu Dhabi. Then Saudi Arab, then it is ExxonMobil, which is of America. Then there is Chevron, PetroChina, Shell, Total Energies, ConocoPhillips, CNOOC, this is China National Oil Company. Then Enbridge, it's of Canada, and Sinopec, this is also of China. So these are the top 10 oil companies. So it varies actually depending on their profitability, their turnaround time, and everything. So it depends on the production, their profit and loss, everything, and this fluctuates. But overall, these are the companies you will see in the top 10 every year, right? And these are all the E&P companies. These are the exploration and production companies. And then we have the top 5 oil and gas service providers, which are Schlumberger or SLB, which is the global drilling and tech leader. They provide digital services as well. Then we have Baker Hughes. Then we have Halliburton, Weatherford, and Technifil. So there are some small companies also in service providing, like we have Telesto now in India, which also is a small service provider. We have other companies, I think there are several, Reslytics and others. So Aspentech. So they have different their softwares and everything, but these are the top 5 companies in the whole world. Now coming to this type of companies in the oil and gas chain, I have already told you that there are upstream, midstream, and downstream, right? So in India, all the companies, all the oil and gas companies we have, that is, for example, ONGC, Oil India, KN, Reliance, everything, all of them, whichever of them has rigs or blocks, everything is controlled by DGH, or this is the regulatory agency, DGH and MOPNG. So every rig or every block, every field, it is owned by the government, and these companies have the license to work on that field and take out the oil, right? So these are the E&P companies in all over the world. These are of India, which is ONGC is the national oil company you all know, which is the largest, and then we have the private oil company, that is KN. And after that, we have several oil field services that I just told, SLB, Baker Hughes, Halliburton, Weatherford, everything. And then we have the refineries and everything. For example, Indian Oil, then Naira, then Reliance refineries as well, and everything, Haldia Petrochemicals, whichever they go on and they extract out the petroleum byproducts and help in the transportation and everything. And then we have another field, that is the consultant or analyst. So what does this consultant or analyst do? They read the market, they study the market, they study lots and lots of data and take out the best fit what a company should do based on that data. What is the current market going on? How is the industry working? What are the other companies doing? And what they should do that would make them the best in the world. So it would be completely a consulting, strategy, planning, programming, this kind of jobs they do. They are the advisors or they are the strategists to some companies. So out of this, we have S&P Global, we have KPMG, Infosys, PwC. They all provide consultancy in GNG sector or in oil and gas industry. So these are all the, like in a very vague term, these are all the opportunities that you can find in this industry. So there are both upstream, midstream, downstream. There can be consultancy as well. There can be several opportunities. We have to just look around. So this is the overall view of the oil and gas industry. Then we will move on to the concepts, the classroom to subsurface part. Right. So we are on the surface. We are standing on the surface. We can't go and just peek into the subsurface. We don't have the license also that we will go and drill. Right. So before drilling, we need to look into a lot of things. We can't just go and drill. Drilling is the last thing that we do. Okay. So to scan the subsurface, to get a record of what is present inside the earth, we have two major processes. One is well logging and one is the seismic survey. So in well logging, what we do is that it is kind of a intrusive method, right? Because we are disturbing the formations. We are putting out a hole and we are making a logging tool or a tool go inside this hole, right? And what it does, it goes into this hole, and since we have drilled through that formation or through the rocks, right? So the rocks are now exposed to the borehole. The wall of the rocks are making the wall of the borehole. So this logging tool, when it goes inside, it sends some signals. It sends some waves, which starts from the source. It goes into the formation, and it again comes back to the receiver. And this is how we get the signatures of the rock, right? So we record this with respect to the depth, how it is coming. So we have several curves like this. So I hope that most of you here are maybe of UG students. So you haven't, and whoever are PG students, I think it's it's the even semester. So it's not the, some of you might having the final semester, some of you are not having the second semester. So some of you may have known what is well logging, how it works, what are the things that we look into whenever we do well logging. But most of you maybe they're looking at a logs for the first time, or they are knowing this logging technique for the first time. So this is one process, how we get an idea about what is the formation, how the rocks are related to each other, how what is the porosity, how they are behaving, and everything, right? So in this thing, who are most interested in these curves that are getting generated? Petrophysicists, geologists, right? Geomechanics people. They are the most excited one. That okay, we have logs, now I'll tell what is the lithology, or what is the how much is the porosity, how much is the permeability, what is the fluid present, right? So this is one process where we can understand about the whatever rock information we are getting from the subsurface. So this is one intrusive method. Please remember this, that this is an intrusive method. We are actually going into the formation. We are actually drilling into the formation. And then we have the seismic survey part. Now this seismic survey can both be intrusive or extrusive. How it is? Like in most of the seismic survey, what happens that we lay out a certain source. For example, this is the source and this is done in water. So let us consider this can be both water and land. So we have a source from which they put out several signals, and we lay down several receivers, an array of receivers. And this source generates waves, or they generates different types of waves which go into the formation. They hit the boundaries of the formations, just like a mirror, the reflection studies, right? This is all a reflection survey. They hit the boundary and they come back and gets acquired at the receivers. and in the receiver we have the information about this boundary, right? Now, whenever there is some contrast between two lithologies, for example, this is sand, this is shale, and there is a sharp contrast between them. So, my formation, my seismic survey, what will it do? It will identify that contrast and it will get reflected at that boundary and it will come back to the receiver. This is how we will get a complete image of my formation, what is there in the subsurface. And this is like we can say this is like an X-ray, not exactly like X-ray, but it is like X-ray, like whatever we are there inside, we are seeing it without disturbing it, right? And just to remember, like that seismic survey is a regional survey and well logging is mostly local. So you can just from the view only you can understand that this is how much. This can be around 5 to 10 kilometers or 5 to 6 kilometers, anything. But logging here, this borehole is mostly how much thick it is. It's around 17.5 inch or mostly 12 quarter inch or 8.5 inch. It's very little. This borehole is very thin. It's not very wide. And mostly how much inside it can go up to this or this maybe. So this is very local, some local information, right? So this is how it works, how we get information about the subsurface. And for the seismic survey, whoever looks into that seismic information, they are mostly geophysicists and geologists. They go and decipher whatever records the source and the receivers have taken. Alright. Now coming to the well logging technique, I would not go into much details because this is not a well logging class. So I'll just give you an overall view so that whenever you listen to these terms in the coming days, you won't feel totally alienated. You have some idea that okay, I have heard this somewhere. So well logging, you can read the definition. It's just a record across depth, record of certain geological properties of the rocks, right? And across the depth. So as we go inside, the depth increases and the response of the formation is recorded. So who invented this well logging technique? This was invented by Conrad and Marcel Schlumberger. They were two French brothers and they decided to try out resistivity logging one day. So they decided that we would measure the resistive nature of the rocks. Okay, and this is how the first log was acquired. I have the photo, but I couldn't put it here. So this is how the first log was acquired, and this is how well logging technique was invented. And this is almost developed by the company Schlumberger, like the company that was established by them, and it's still going on. And now lots of companies do that. But in the initial days, Schlumberger brothers were the one who did it. So you can see that this is a logging tool, right? And it has several structures attached to its base. Here also there are some logging tools. You can see these. These are all the logging tools. So these tools have different works. For example, this tool can do only acoustic logging. This tool can only do resistivity logging. This tool can only do gamma ray logging. This tool can only do caliper logging. So once we drill the borehole, we take out that drill bit and everything, and then we start inserting these logging tools one by one. For example, first I want to take an account of the gamma ray. So we put out this gamma ray log. Then we pull this out and we put out this tool. And then this, and then this. So this is how this works. And now more advanced tools has come up where we have more than one functionality in one tool. So those are also there. And this is how the logging tool works. And there can be two types of logging. One is the wireline logging and the other is the logging while drilling. So from the name only you can understand that this logging while drilling is what? We are drilling simultaneously, we are logging the formations. So it's doing both the things at the same time, right? And for wireline logging, what it does, we have drilled, we have taken out the drill bit, and then we have put in the logging tool. So it is actually bound by a wire like this. You can see there is a wire. That is why this is called wireline log. It's connected to a wire, which is it's a wireline thing, and we generally drop it inside the board. It reaches the bottom, and then we slowly pull it out. And when we pull it out, we start recording. So it's always recorded bottom to top. Okay. So this thing you have to understand, that it's always recorded from bottom to the top. Okay. Now there are several well logging techniques. Like there are several types of well logging, which we can just have a small overview. One is the electrical logging. What is this? Electrical logging is one of the most common logging technique. Okay, it involves what? It involves the use of electrical measurements. Okay, to determine the properties of the rock formation, or maybe if fluids are present. So there are different types of electrical logging techniques, but the most important or the most common one is the resistivity log and the spontaneous potential log, or the SP log, that you have all heard of, I think. But nowadays SP log is not used much in the industry. Like I haven't seen any SP log till now, so it is not used, I assume. Now, what does resistivity log does? It measures the resistive nature of the rocks. We know that rocks are by nature very resistive, right? If we have water present in the rock, or the rock is, if it is shale or clay, then it can be somewhat less resistive because it has some amount of anions or cations present on their surfaces, right? Or water have some sort of minerals or some sort of salts present in them. So that is why they make the overall rock a less resistive. Otherwise, hydrocarbons, gas, oil, normal rock, all are actually very resistive. So this is one type of electrical logging. Then we have the sonic logging. Now, sonic, from the name only, you can understand that it uses sound waves, right? Sonic sound waves to determine the properties of the rock formation and fluids that are present in the wellbore. So what it does, it sends the signal and it records the time it takes to come back. So if the rock is totally sound and totally compact, because we know that sound waves, they move faster in a very hard substance, right? It moves slower in somewhat that is somewhat very for example in fluids, not exactly in fluids, but in very soft substances and anything, it moves slowly. But higher the rigidity of the substance, it would move in very fast. So sonic logs, they measures the time taken for the sound waves to come up, and it determines the porosity, the permeability, the compressibility of the formation. Okay, and then we have the nuclear logging. Now, what is nuclear logging? It either uses natural radioactivity of the formation, that my formation have some sort of radioactive nature, because my formation has shale, my formation has clay, and clay contains potassium. So potassium can be radioactive in nature, right? K40 is radioactive in nature. So what it does, it measures the natural radioactivity that is coming out of the formation. Either this, or they emit neutron particles into the formation, which goes and collides with the hydrogen molecule of the water or the fluids, or even with the formation, and come back. So this is what we call nuclear logging. And finally, we have imaging logging. So they use the involvement of, I had some echo. And finally, we have the imaging logging. What it does, it uses some cameras and other imaging devices to obtain the visual information about the wellbore. So from image logging, we can clearly see if there are fractures present, if there are faults present, if there is anything, any certain type of fractures, any primary structures, anything. We can get an idea from the image logging. So this is an overall idea of the well logging thing. Okay. So just a little bit of more well-logging images I wanted to show you. That we have gamma ray, we have density, we have neutron. It is called neutron porosity. Then we have, this is Poisson's ratio and velocity of compressional wave. So these are actually calculated once the logs are acquired. And here we have also, this is the caliper, and this is, the red one is neutron and the blue one is bulk density. So I would not go into much details about why there is shale written here, why there is gas sandstone written here, why there is shale written again. So if you want to know, you can later on ask me in the question. I would explain then. But otherwise, this is not a part of whatever we are talking today. Just to give you an overall idea that if my formation has high radioactivity, for example, as I told, if my formation has shale or clay minerals, then my gamma ray record will be higher. If my formation is sandstone, that is, pure sandstone is made up of what? It's made up of silica, it's made up of quartz, right? So it won't have any radioactivity, so my gamma ray reading will be very low. And if my sandstone is made up of some amount of feldspar, right? We have sandstone that are made up of feldspars, that contain feldspar. What are they called? They are called arkose, right? So if I have some arkosic sandstone, then in that case, we can be decepted. We can have some amount of high gamma ray in sandstone as well. So for that, we need to look into very closely that whether we are reading shale or we are reading high feldspar sandstones, right? Then we have density. So in density, what does density measure? Density measures the bulk density of the rock. So clearly you can understand that a shale will have a certain density, a sandstone will have a certain density. Now, if some amount of that rock contains porosity, and if the porosity contains some amount of water or any sort of fluid, then the overall bulk density of that rock will decrease, right? And my density logging will be very less. Our density measurement will be less. So from that we can understand that, okay, if my sand, I am getting sand here and my density is also decreasing, so maybe there is something, or there can be something in this formation. So we will have a hint, we can have an identification criteria. Then we have porosity, or the neutron porosity, that we mostly call it in porosity because of what it measures actually. So this is a topic itself, so I'm not moving into that. So this is, we call porosity because it finally measures the porosity of the formation. Okay, so this also measures the amount of hydrogen that is present in the formation. Now ideally, what we know, that sandstone contains no hydrogen, right? Shale can contain small amount of hydrogen when it has some clay minerals like mica, like other kaolinite or other montmorillonite or vermiculite, anything, right? So it has some bound water, so it has some amount of hydrogen. But if my formation, if my sand contains water, if my sand contains hydrocarbon, then the hydrogen content of that formation would increase, right? And that would be recorded in this neutron porosity. So we will get an idea about the pore spaces. So we consider that if my formation has high hydrogen, that means my formation has high porosity. Yes, there can be some uncertainty due to the shale and clay minerals, but overall it is the same. And then we have Poisson's ratio. I'm ignoring this track because this is not what we need to know. It is not recorded from the formation. It is, we calculate afterwards. And we have velocity. This is the velocity of the compressional wave. Okay, so we reverse it and we take the sonic transit time. So it is also what you will learn later. I can talk more about it, but not today, not in this session. Okay, and finally we have the caliper. So bit size is what? Bit size is the size of the bit that we are using to drill the formation, right? So if we are using a bit of 8.5 inch, so my hole will be of 8.5 inch only, right? The diameter should be 8.5 inch, or the size of the bit should be exactly the size of the hole. But it is not the case, right? Because we are drilling at a very high pressure. We are drilling at 2-3 kilometers inside the earth. even more. I have seen 20,000 feet of drilling as well. So it comes around 6-7 kilometers. So we are drilling at certain high pressure, and my hole and whatever I am drilling, I am removing some amount of rocks, right? So there is a void that is formed. So my rock from the surrounding, they try to get into the borehole, and it creates some distortion in the shape of the borehole. So to get an idea about the shape of the borehole, we run the caliper log. So if my caliper size, that is if my actual borehole size is more than my bed size, that means we are having some cavings there. If my borehole size is less than the bed size, that means we have some permeable formation and something has gotten into that pore spaces, the permeable spaces, and they have reduced the borehole space. So we call that mud cake. Now why we call it mud cake? We would discuss this later. Okay. Now coming to the resolution of the logging tools. First, let us understand what does depth of investigation mean. So whoever who are new to this geology background or who are new to this geology world, just to let you know, I think most of you have known this already, but depth of investigation does not mean the vertical depth. It means the lateral depth. That laterally, how much intrusive we are going into the rock. Okay. So if my, let me go to this previous image. Yes. So depth of investigation means that how much this side and this side we can go into this formation. Okay. If you can go highly deep, then it is higher depth of investigation. If you can go only very small distance, this is lower depth of investigation. So we can see that, and this resolution, this is the vertical resolution that we are talking, that we generally mean. That vertically, how much fine material or fine layers it can take into account. Okay. So we can see the resistivity log, the induction log and the lateral log. They have both high depth of investigation and high resolution. So it can study deep inside the formation. So you have to keep one thing in mind, that whatever is coming from a very high depth of investigation, higher we go, the more true formation response we are getting. Because near the wellbore, there are a lot of reactions happening. Okay. So sometimes, as we have seen in mineralogy, right, the boundaries of the minerals gets altered during metamorphic processes or during very contact metamorphism thing, or whenever they come in contact with some fluid. So what happens? The reaction boundary, they create a reaction boundary, and the boundary of the minerals gets altered. Same thing happens here. The boundary formations of the borehole, they gets altered. And if the response are coming from that boundary region, very shallow depth of investigation, then it is often wrong, because it's reading the altered areas, not the actual formation that we need to know. So higher the depth of investigation, more true formation response we are getting. So we have resistivity that takes in very high formation response, more robust response. Then we have the neutron gamma ray, that is the radioactive part. They are almost in 40 centimeters in vertical resolution and 50-60 centimeters in depth of investigation. Then we have density. Density is very low, and sonic is also very low. So therefore, density is often affected by the borehole condition. So we have to be very careful to study the density logs. All right. So this is the overall the logs that we see: gamma ray, density, porosity. Just to give you all an idea, the sonic logs, everything, so that you are not alien to this topic. You know something, that okay, what are logs mean? We know something. We have seen something. You can just keep in mind whenever you are studying sedimentology, whenever you are studying anything else, you can have an idea. Okay, this is sand layer. So okay, my log response will come like this. Or this is sand layer. So my density will come around this depth, around this value, right? The porosity will come around this value. So you can just, if you have interest, you can just go and search in different responses of the lithologies. You can get in a lot of insights. Okay, so here are different questions that generally comes into geologists or petrophysicists' mind. whenever they see a log. So geologists are mostly concerned. Okay, I have a question. How important is coding or data analysis in modern geology? Yeah, we have a slide on that. We'll come into that thing. So just bear me till the end. And okay, so these are some of the questions. You can just go through it and you can get an idea that how logs help different domains, how geologists get help from the logs, how petrophysicists get help from the logs, geophysicists, geomechanics, and everything. Right. And here is a small chart which you can take in to understand that what are the usefulness of the logs. Okay. So neutron density and sonic logs are used for porosity calculation. Then we have caliper log, which are mostly related to the shape of the borehole, and then we have gamma ray, which is mainly to lithology, correlation, and anything. And then we have density as well, which is also of lithology and porosity. Okay. So logging part, that intrusive part is done. So we have now the sequence stratigraphy and seismic sections. So most of you, I don't think you have heard or you have learned the subject sequence stratigraphy, because it's something that is introduced in masters. People that are in masters, they have definitely heard of the subject. They know that how important it is, and whoever are in the UG, I think maybe their syllabus has changed. They can get introduced into sequence stratigraphy early in undergraduate, but I think overall the sequence stratigraphy is not a very deep, is not a very common subject. So overall, what does sequence stratigraphy do? It measures different layers, it takes in different sedimentary layers and mark it, or it creates boundaries based on the time, right? We have chronostratigraphy and lithostratigraphy, right? So what does lithostratigraphy do? It marks the boundary based on different lithologies. And in chronostratigraphy, what does they do? They mark the boundaries depending on time. So sequence stratigraphy deals in that chronostratigraphy part. So this is a overall curve that actually helps to us to understand sequence stratigraphy. I would not go into much details here. So this is the base. I would just clear out some of the terms. That base level means the mean sea level of the sea, the mean sea level, right? And there are certain terms like progradation, retrogradation. So what does progradation mean? So progradation means that sediment that are deposited during regression, and retrogradation means sediment that are deposited during transgression, right? Aggradation means just vertical thickening of the sediments. That nothing is happening, just sedimentation is happening. Sedimentation is going on. And then we have several terms like low system tract, high stand system tract, and transgressive system tract. So these are different terms that are related to this sequence, boundaries, and everything. So it is mostly transgressive system tract means whenever our sea level is rising, whatever depositional package we are getting, it is called the transgressive system tract. High stand means that whenever my water level is started to fall, okay, it has not completely gone out, but it has started to fall like this. This is where we have high stand system tract, and when my water level is starting to go up, we have low stand system tract. So these are some of the terminologies that we need to know. And this is just seismic sections. I have not put in much interpretation part here. This is how it looks if we take a vertical cross section of the formations, and this is how it looks. So we can see that this black and red lines, so these are mostly the peaks and troughs. So if you see a seismic attribute recorded, everything, then you can understand that what it is, red and black lines. And we have in the top, we have, these are all sedimentary packages that are deposited in different transgression and regression sequences, right? So in this this black lines, these actually mark the boundaries based on major depositional differences. Okay, so this is how seismic section looks, and this is how it looks if we take a vertical cross section of the subsurface. And you can see some faults here, right? You can see these are the faults, these are the faults, these are the faults. So see, these are all the faults that are marked. Okay, so coming to the almost the final part of the presentation, that is geomechanics. This is something that I do, and what I deal with, I wanted to give you a very small overview. That you all have learned about Mohr circle. I think almost Mohr circle is very common to you all. You have learned in first or second semester maybe. And it is what it does. It presents the 2D stress state of a region. Okay. So we deal with this Mohr circle. This is where I wanted you to know that how these conceptual things actually we apply in practical. So, for example, we first determine the overburden stress. So what is overburden stress? It's just the stress that is exerted by the overburden layers on the lower layers, right? So we know the basic formula is rho GH. So what we do, we just integrate the formula as rho GH from top to bottom. So this is how overburden stresses are calculated. Okay. Now we have some fluids present in the pore spaces, in the porosity part. Okay, so these fluids, they exert some pressure on these boundary walls, and this is what we call the pore pressure. Okay. So we try to model this pore pressure also, because we know you have all heard about effective stress. So that is the stress minus the pore pressure. To get the actual amount of effective stress, we need to know the pore pressure very well. Then we have something called rock strength, like how strong the rock is. So mostly we go with UCS or triaxial compressive strength, that is TCS. So we either go with UCS test or we go with triaxial or TCS test. So what happens? In UCS test, we do not have any lateral boundary. We have just a cylinder, we pressure it axially, and we test that how many fractures or what type of fractures are forming in this this core, right, in the cylinder. And in triaxial, what we have, we put this core into a jacket and we put it within a boundary so that we have some amount of this lateral stresses developed as well. So in both the cases, we get the strength of the rock. So this also we need to know if we are modeling anything subsurface. Then we have the Anderson fault, right? You have all learned about the Anderson theory of faulting. We have different stresses like the horizontal stresses and the vertical stresses that are oriented in this 3D space, and depending on their orientation and depending on their arrangement, different types of faults get developed. So we have strike slip fault, we have reverse fault, we have normal fault. So using all the log information, using all these information, we try to understand the orientation of the fault in the field, okay, so that we can apply it. We can understand what regime the well lies in. And then finally, we have something that is very known to you, that is the Mohr circle. So from Mohr circle, what do we get? We get the friction angle, right? So what is the friction angle? You have studied that friction angle is basically this angle, but what it is actually, it is the angle up to which the rock can resist any stress upon itself. So that is the friction angle. And we have the cohesion as well. Okay, the internal strength of the grains, the internal cohesive strength of the grains. So these all things that you have learned in maybe structural geology or maybe in engineering geology, these are all very useful in the oil and gas industry, and this is what it controls everything. The drilling part, it is completely dependent on this, on all these things that you are currently learning in your classrooms. So we have different drilling terminologies that normal people or in normal classrooms we do not know into much details. For example, we have something called mud weight. We haven't heard of it, right? So this is a borehole, okay? And you can see there is something called casing. So whenever we are drilling through it, we are putting something void here. We are keeping this is something we don't. Nothing is there. We have pulled out all the rock materials and everything. So to prevent this borehole to collapse, because this rock is giving pressure to this wall, this rock is giving pressure to this wall. To prevent it from collapsing, we have to case it. We have to put it under some support. So this is what we call casing. And we have different stresses that are working in these formations. It can be the pore pressure, it can be the normal stresses that we have just seen, the horizontal stresses, the vertical stresses, and everything. So if we consider that our rocks contain porosity and they are all connected to each other and they contain water, which are all connected, okay, then they would exert a certain amount of pore pressure on the boundary walls that we have seen. So that amount of pore pressure that they exert, this is called the hydrostatic pressure, which is this blue line. Okay, now this is the ideal case. In general, this does not happen because, right, our pores, first of all, our rocks are not at all completely connected. The pores are somewhat connected, somewhat not connected. It can contain water, it may not contain water, it may contain hydrocarbons, it can contain gas or oil, anything. So in that case, my pore pressure would vary. It can increase, it can decrease than this blue line. So if you are getting any pressure, any pore pressure that is more than this blue line, that is more than the hydrostatic pressure, we call it overpressure. And if it is going down, we call it underpressure. Okay. Now there are several reasons, we are not getting into that, but these are some of the very minute details that we look into while drilling. And while, like I have told you, right, that after drilling, to secure the wellbore, we put in a jacket, we put in a casing. So after drilling, we have put in a casing. Okay, fine, fair enough, no problem. But during drilling also, right, there is some sort of chance that my borehole will collapse. My formation will get into this wellbore, and my everything, crores of rupees, crores of dollars will be lost just because my borehole could not stand the formation stresses. So to prevent that, what we do, we drill with certain amount of mud. We drill with certain amount of mud weight. So we use a mud that have some amount of pressure that is almost equivalent to the formation pressures. So it balances out the formation pressure. Okay. So if it balances out the formation pressure, so what will happen? The stresses here will neither go inside or anything inside the borehole will not go into the formations. Okay. Now, if my mud weight is less than my formation pressure, or if my mud weight is less than my formation pore pressure, then what will happen? All the fluids that are present inside the pore spaces, they will try to come into that borehole. And in this case, what happens? My fluids are lost. They are lost into the borehole, they are mixed with the mud, they can't be recovered anytime. Therefore, this is a very serious issue, and this is what we call kick. Okay, so here you can see the terminology, it's called kick or kick zone. Okay. And if my mud weight is more than the stresses that are inside the formation, the sigma h min, the sigma h max, anything, mostly the sigma h min, the minimum horizontal stress, then what happens? My mud weight will try to break into the formation and it will create fractures, and through that fractures, my mud will be lost. And this is what we call loss. Now, this is also equally problematic because what? If my mud is lost, then it will go and contaminate the fluids inside the formation. And we won't be able to recover the high quality fluid that we wanted to recover, or sometimes what happens, it pushes the gas deep inside the formation. So we won't be able to recover the formation fluids. So both are equally disastrous. Therefore, we need to have an optimum mud weight to drill. And this is what we determine through all the logs, through all the calculations, the stresses, the pore pressure, the density, sonic, gamma ray, everything. We come into the final output we come into is that what mud weight should we use to drill through the formations, to drill through the rock in order to have a proper balanced situation. Okay. So I'm not going into much details about explaining these fractures and anything because these are just image to show you the scale. This is the stable mud weight window. More than the sigma h mean, it will create loss. Less than the pore pressure, it will create the kick. Okay. All right. So we are almost done with this presentation. I think I have seen some questions regarding some of the important concepts from college that turns out to be the most useful in real world subsurface decisions. So I think we have discussed, my entire presentation was on this. So I think we have already discussed some of those. Just to give you a small hint about what are the subjects that we need to focus on. And I think this is the most interesting part for most of you, that what are the subjects that we need to learn in order to get into this industry or in order to crack interviews for this industry is mostly structural geology, then sedimentology, sequence stratigraphy, geophysics, well logging, everything. So I know that you have learned about folds, faults, structures, stresses, right? You have learned about structural maps. You have spent hours and hours deciphering the structural maps. What is the actual structure present, the folds, the faults, and everything, the contour diagrams, right? So these are very important. If you are doing that, keep on doing that. Learn this very well. This will certainly help you in cracking the interviews. These are very crucial concepts that you need to cling on. If you want to continue in this industry. If you want to go for PhD, definitely these are useful. This is what you will be doing. But in the industry also, this is very useful. Structural geology is a very important subject. Then we have sedimentology. This helps us to understand the basin evolution, how my basin works, how if my basin is actually correctly can be considered to be a petroleum system or not, anything. So for that, you would need to learn about the lithologies, the sand, shale, dolomite, brixia, everything, the primary structures, the fractures, the sedimentary depositions, the depositional environments, the marine, the shallow marine, the deep marine, the fluvial, the continental, everything. Okay, this will help you to understand that what type of hydrocarbon we can expect from a particular depositional environment, or what type of processes can have taken place there in order to create the hydrocarbons. Then we have sequence stratigraphy. We have already discussed that sequence stratigraphy is it's a very beautiful subject. I would just recommend you to, if you can get an idea about the subject, please go read it, have it. Take this subject as one of your major courses in your masters or UG if you get the opportunity. It's a very important topic. It is almost like very few people actually understand sequence stratigraphy to the great core. So if you can develop this trait in yourself, it's very good. It's very nice. So you can learn about different system tract, transgression, regression, sedimentation, accommodation space, and everything. And this will help you a lot in understanding the seismic sections in exploration works in E&P companies. It's very good. Next, if you want to focus on geophysics, then geophysics is one of the most vital tools that we use in this industry. If there is no geophysics, we won't be able to understand anything about the subsurface, because this is the tool that helps us to get an idea about the subsurface formation, subsurface behavior of the rocks, the subsurface behavior of the fluids and everything. So we have the seismic attributes, the seismic processing techniques, AVO analysis, rock physics, how rocks behaves, how fluids behave with the rock grains and everything. So there is hydrodynamics working on that pore pressures, that pore spaces. So it's very important. You must take up geophysics, at least if you want to be a geologist, you can have some idea studying anything and everything you like, it would help you create that tenacity, the habit of studying in you. So everything will help you to enter into this world. But most importantly, if you go on by subjects, these are the topics you can focus on. And finally, we have the hot topic, right? How important is AI, ML, and Python and data science in the world of geoscience and the current world? So for this, it's a both. It's can never be a no, because the world is changing. Everything surrounding you is changing. Everything is getting involved in ChatGPT, in any generative AI, any data science things and everything. So these things you can't ignore. I use in my company, I use some softwares that are of the company. The softwares are getting upgraded into AI modules and everything. So it's good that if you get an opportunity, please develop yourself in any of these fields. You don't have to be a pro in Python, just like in any IT or any software industry. Just have an overall idea about what is AI, what is ML, how it works, what are the logics. Like we have some things, right? Like supervised classification, supervised learning, unsupervised learning. You can get an idea about that concepts, how to apply them. You can learn Python, you can learn MATLAB. You don't have to aggressively code. You can just learn about them. It's a very good to have skills. You must have some skill related to it, and like when you will be sitting for the interviews or in the past 5 to 6 years, it is going to change a lot. Every software, every company will try to involve these generative AI, these things into its system. So it's good to have an idea. I'm not asking you to code aggressively or you have to be a full on data scientist and everything. But if you have this as one of your special skills, or if you have some knowledge about this, then it is very good. You can apply it to easily do your work as well, to easily present something as well. So it would reduce your workload. So my answer to this question or anything or this about this AI ML topic is that you try to have some amount of experience in it, some amount of courses. There are ample amount of courses. There are courses in geoscience as well. So I would suggest that you go on and search about the use of AI, use of Python, use of MATLAB, use of data science and geosciences, and take those courses and learn something from it. So it's nice to have them in your CV or in your biodata. And this is where I conclude my talk. I think I am just 1 minute above 7 p.m. So it's almost 1 hour. And the final thing the quote that I always go by, I always follow, and I suggest you to follow is that always try to take suggestions, give value to the suggestions, the experiences that people are taking in with them, but always choose your path yourself. Always follow what you are feeling. You take suggestion, you modify your plan according to it, but do not blindly go and follow everything that I am telling you or anybody else is telling. So the only solutions that are ever worth anything, that will ever worth anything in your life, that you will always remember, are those only that you people find yourselves. So I'll always go on by this, and same suggestion to you all. Thank you for listening to my talk, and I hope you guys didn't sleep. So thank you. Any question? Everything. Now it's open to you all.
Thank you, ma'am. So I would request the audience to send all the questions in the chat box. So we have already few questions in the chat box. Will I read, or you will see?
Just give me a minute. I'll be back in 1 minute. Okay, just give me a minute.
Okay, ma'am.